Werewolves! They're back! Mainly because in the horror-fueled world of ancient immortal vampires and eternally cursed lycanthropes, the furrier amongst them need a little bit of a helping hand when it comes to the exposure of their appropriate cinematic depictions. As we said in our first part to this list, werewolves in horror cinema have historically had a pretty bum deal, and few films have managed to properly portray the visceral, painstaking transformations that we expect from the big bad wolves. Now, you all seem to happily agree with my list for part 1, so let's see what else we can do. Hello horror fans, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. As per usual, I'll be your horror host, Jack Finch, as today we curiously take a look at the top 5 scariest werewolf movies of all time. Part 2. Roll the clip. For the curious amongst you, that clip was from 1983's The Beast and the Magic Sword, starring the legendary lycanthrope Count Waldemar Daninsky, played by Paul Naschy, because much like in our first part of this series, we have to pay tribute to some of the most iconic horror staples, and no one is more renowned in Spanish B-movie werewolf horror than this guy. So yeah, credit where credit is due. In fact, although the lengthy Waldemar Daninsky series doesn't exactly hold up anymore, some of those films cover some really gross concepts, so if you're in the mood for that stuff, why not, right? And talking about paying tribute, kicking off at number 5, The Wolfman, 2010. And it kind of makes me sad, because I'm torn in two by this movie, much like the human victims of the titular Wolfman, or Wolfmen in this case. You see, this film had so much potential to be brilliant, and I'm not quite sure exactly where it went wrong, but still, fear not, because the most important thing for you Top 5 Scary viewers though, is that this film is bloody, filled with gore and grotesque transformations, and from a visual perspective, it hits every box when it comes to what we expect from werewolf horror. Also, the cast is absolutely stacked, and it's almost impressive in itself that a film with such acting pedigree flopped so massively at the box office. Benicio del Toro, Sir Anthony Hopkins, Emily Blunt, Hugo Weaving. Yeah, some really big names. Written by David South and based upon the 1941 werewolf classic of the same name, The Wolfman tells the tale of a Victorian man, Lawrence Talbot, played by the awesome Benicio del Toro, who is fantastic in this film despite its critical review, that returns home to his estranged father, played by the legendary Sir Anthony Hopkins, only to discover that there's something lurking deep beneath the family tree. You see, the plot is simple, perhaps too simple in its approach for a remake of a film from 1941, but I think the reason that this film didn't exactly strike a chord where it was meant to was partly because of the ending and its resolution, which of course I won't spoil for you, but actually really makes sense. Still, Benicio del Toro produced this film himself, and he put so much love into it, as it was one of his first inspirations as an actor, and he was a massive fan of the original Wolfman, and you can tell. And that alone is reason enough to watch 2010's The Wolfman, because most of all, it's fun. Transformations, howling at the moon, Benicio del Toro ripping people's throats off. Yeah, we're spoiled for choice. Also, Max von Sydow makes a cameo in the director's cut, so there's another reason. Coming in at number 4, Where? 2013.
Oh, what a good boy. What's he doing?
Here, stay close to your dad.
And in complete flip reverse to 2010's The Wolfman, this film in particular decided to pay its dues to werewolf horror and approach the genre from a completely new direction, and for the most part, this film works to a frightening efficiency, and 2013's Where is very much a fresh, snarling breath of air for fans of lycanthropy. Much like how Afflicted did the same for the vampire genre, this film does the same for werewolves by giving them a worthy documentary-style entry into the halls of horror, although it kind of isn't that at all, and it technically isn't a found footage film. But still, listen, this film definitely has its faults, and again, this film wasn't exactly heralded by critics as a game changer for horror, mainly down to its CGI, but come on, it's far from being bad. The reason that this film is a success for fans of werewolves, aren't we all, is because, most importantly, Where is a monster movie. It very much has a clear villain, and that allows it to pull no punches with the throat-ripping and lycanthropic rampage. Written and directed by William Brent Bow, Where follows a crew of investigators who are tracking down the deaths of an American family after they were vacationing in a French countryside, and their bodies were found ripped to shreds. Of course, the strange, shadowy local loner that lives with his mother out in the woods quickly becomes the source of hot suspicion, and then we're off, rampaging our way across the city. There's not much more to it really. We watch werewolf horror movies to see a Claude feral lycan ravage their way across the screen, right? Where is that movie? And it's surprisingly great. Next up at number 3, Wolf, 1994.
Yeah.
We all need some money.
I've got about $1,000 in my wallet. How much would you like to borrow? $5? 10?
And we touched upon this point in the first part of this video list series. More often than not, cinema has treated werewolf horror more so as a horror comedy, finding it difficult to balance the equal parts grotesque body horror with the reality of becoming a ravenous lycanthrope. And because of that, in the latter quarter of the 20th century, cinema approached werewolves with all the camp that they could throw at it. But the 90s were a different time. The 90s was the time of romance, romantic comedies, romantic thrillers, and romantic horrors. Just like 1994's Wolf, and who better to play the Lycan than the big bad wolf himself, Jack Nicholson. Listen, this film isn't your traditional werewolf horror. There's little of the vulgar thrill and excessive gore that we've come to love in the genre, but strangely, Wolf finds its intrigue within its exceptional cast and characterization. In fact, this film is perhaps the closest we've come to a mainstream depiction of werewolf horror, and because of that pedigree, it really does work. Wolf stars the legend that is Jack Nicholson as Will Randall, a highly successful editor-in-chief that subsequently gets bitten by a werewolf and loses his job pretty much in the same day. After getting betrayed by his best friend and colleague Stuart Swinton, played by James Spader, the pair quickly strike down a path that propagates who's who in the alpha males of both the wolf pack and the big city life of downtown Manhattan. Because the perfect foil to Jack's big bad wolf is of course James Spader, who is incredibly creepy in this film, and in fact the vast majority of the horror comes from his performance alone. You see, the best part about 1994's Wolf though is that the actual physical effects of the werewolves are second to none, and the plot takes itself seriously enough to segue the aforementioned camp by giving the borderline lycans reason to still maintain their human form. I won't say anything more, but surprisingly, Wolf really takes its folklore seriously, and that's a very good thing. Swinging in next at number 2, Howl, 2015. This film is great, and the fact that it's a British indie movie that went straight to DVD will probably do no wonders for the fact that it otherwise fell straight down the black hole void of surprisingly brilliant horror movies from the United Kingdom that didn't get the credit they deserved. You see, it should, because Howl is awesome, and it's very much in line with the pedigree of another British werewolf horror that made our part 1 list, Dog Soldiers. And guess what? This film is pretty much the second cousin of Dog Soldiers, as most of its production crew worked alongside Neil Marshall back in 2002, and this film's director, Paul Hyatt, was the guy who made the incredible prosthetics and physical effects of Marshall's werewolves. So that's reason alone to watch this film. And in fact, I think 2015's Howl may give Dog Soldiers a run for its money when it comes to the characterization of its lycans, because they are fantastically terrifying throughout this film. Also, Howl features the awesome Sean Pertwee in it, as in Wales from Dog Soldiers, albeit not for long. So yeah, another reason. Okay, I'll stop with the connections now. Much like Dog Soldiers, the brilliance of Howl is in its simplicity and its approach to the subgenre with respectful efficiency. There's not much to Howl really. A train breaks down in the middle of a forest in England during a full moon, and of course it's down to the down on his luck train conductor Joe, played by Ed Spielers, to try and keep his passengers alive. I'll say no more because there's not much more to ruin, but Howl is one of the most worthy werewolf experiences of recent times, and it's more than worth a watch. And finally, coming in at a number 1 spot, The Company of Wolves. Considered by many to be the greatest werewolf film ever made. And come on guys, it may be just that, but I had to save some material for part 2, right? Because in many ways, The Company of Wolves really is awesome, if not perhaps the truest lycan folklore, down to the fact that it was written by one of the most astute minds in horror and magical realism, the late great Angela Carter. And if you haven't read her fantastic 1979 book, The Bloody Chamber, stop what you're doing right now and do so, because for fans of top 5 scary videos, videos that love nothing more than folklore and horror, it's a terrifying compendium of both of those things. The film itself is based upon the werewolf story that features in the Bloody Chamber, and true to her word, Carter saw through her vision to the silver screen. Essentially, this film is a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, although obviously it peers much deeper beneath the darkness of its classic tale. The thing is though, The Company of Wolves is not a children's film in the traditional folklore sense, and it is definitely not an exploitation film either, perhaps in some kind of classic werewolf B-movie fashion. It's neither of those things, but it's also kind of both of those things at the same time. I think in many ways The Company of Wolves could have only been made during the specific age that it existed, and it very much is a product of its time, while still being an interpretation of a timeless tale. There's not much more to say really, there is just so much going on deep within the retelling of Rosaline and her long lost werewolf love that everyone's interpretation will be different. So in that case, I guess I'll leave it all for you all to interpret. And there we have it, horror fans, our part 2 list for the top 5 scariest werewolf movies of all time. What do you guys think? Do you agree? Have any more to add? Then why don't you let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below. And who knows, maybe we can even see where a part 3 would take us. If you'd like to continue on with your monster-fueled horror binge, make sure to hit our relevant playlist floating to the side, and you can carry on for your viewing pleasure. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for in today's video. Cheers for sticking around all the way until the end. If you were a fan of this video, please be a dear and hit that thumbs up button, as well as that subscribe bell, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. As per usual, I've been your horror host, Jack Finch. You've been watching top 5 scary videos, and until next time, you take it easy.